So we knew that this UN agency was making a difference. Without him and his celebrity and his ability to get the dollars out of Paramount to make this film, no one would have known what UNICEF was doing, or no one here. And he has, of course, started a long history now of celebrities working with United Nations organizations. Star Trek was used to teach business principles. That is a business book in the middle there. Make it so, leadership lessons from Star Trek: The Next Generation. In the same vein, has books out there like Leadership Lessons of Attila the Hun and Abraham Lincoln on leadership, and all these other books that use a personality to make the learning fun. This particular book used a Star Trek character and the Star Trek storylines to teach things. And then the photo on the right is actually from a Star Trek episode where the man in green had a brief walk-on part with no lines because he isn't an actual actor. But he's such a fan of Star Trek that he arranged to be given this little walk-on part, and I believe it was 1996. Anybody care to guess who that is? That's King Abdullah of Jordan. That's not, George Clooney. That's one of the major world leaders today, even though that happened over 10 years ago. And in my research, I learned that he used to bring Star Trek actors to Jordan for his own private little Star Trek conventions, because he enjoyed that vision of the future so much, and it gave him hope. And so he tried to take those lessons and figure out in the context of his culture what he could do to make the world a better place. And so...
Where would Star Wars fit in?
Well, the trick about Star Wars is it's in a galaxy far, far away a long, long time ago. It's not about us. Star Trek is the history of humanity, and it's our future. So that's always been the distinction for me. And if you follow the Star Trek timeline, and Gene Roddenberry was a humanist and had this vision of everybody, treating everybody equal and not worrying about race or anything else. He was also a realist, and he believed that there would have to be a World War III to shake us up significantly enough to get us to make the change. And World War III was actually portrayed, or the aftermath of World War III was portrayed in the movie Star Trek First Contact, where they go back in time with the board and they meet the guy who invents warp drive. You may or may not have seen that episode, that movie. But they specifically say we're going back to the year 2053, not that long from now, and that 600 million people died in World War III. So, it's a fun show, but it has a serious undertone that we actually may still need to kill off.
I think Star Wars gives another dimension to what you say about hope and everything else as well.
Oh, it's got a lot. Oh, it's got Joseph Campbell and all, but it's not about us. That's the
I think it is. It's a story, a lesson.
I got you. So, here are two instances when the media and entertainment industries have not just taught bits and pieces of America things like the Star Trek episode, Mike. They taught the whole country. World War II is credited with getting us out of the Great Depression. Well, guess what got us through World War II successfully? Training films made by Hollywood. The first motion picture unit run by Jack Warner of Warner Brothers. He was hired by the government to make these films because the ones the government was making were putting our soldiers to sleep. They were terrible training films. And the government realized that they weren't producing what they needed, education-wise. So they went to Hollywood and they said, we need you. And there was this huge operation run by Jack Warner, people like Ronald Reagan, that's Jimmy Stewart in Winning Your Wings. This was actually shown in movie theaters. This wasn't just to train pilots. This was to invite people to become pilots. This was a film shown in movie theaters that showed what it would be like if you decided to join up and learn how to be a pilot. So they showed all the good living conditions, all the good food you would eat, and because this was Hollywood, they also showed that if you wear the wings on your uniform and you go to the USO club, you get the girl. So this is Hollywood. But it was part of getting America organized around the war effort. We didn't just do it, out of osmosis. We were taught what we needed to know in order to become a unified country. And in 1955, and this had much more of a capitalistic slant to it, Walt Disney was just opening Disneyland. One of the parts of Disneyland was called Tomorrowland. Walt Disney was worried that people were going to see Tomorrowland and think, well, that's a fantasy. But Disney knew that the science existed, even though we hadn't gone to the moon yet. He knew Werner von Braun. So he and Werner von Braun, that's a picture of the two of them, worked together on 3 TV specials, shown as part of the early era of the Wonderful World of Disney. And you can find these videos on YouTube, or you can buy the DVD on eBay that they produced a few years ago when they went to vaults and put this special package together. This is showing the American people that we now have the science to do something that everyone had thought was a fantasy up until that point. Not unlike the situation we are in today, where you still, I'm sure, if you took a survey, would get a lot of people to say, oh, it's a fantasy. We can't ever feed clothes that house everyone on the planet. After all, it's not enough, or we're never going to be able to stop going to war with each other, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all these reasons. Except there are people who know how to do it. There are the Werner von Brauns of the sustainability movement. They just haven't met their Walt Disney yet. But they can. And I'll show you how. Next chapter. I promised a talk about what this Think and Do tank is going to do. And I call it Think and Do. And it's a phrase I learned from Amory Lovins of the Rocky Mountain Institute, who doesn't just develop very energy efficient technology, he actually works to get it used, creates little spin-off organizations. I've seen him demonstrate this amazing material that could be the body of a car, and it's very light and incredibly strong. It's like you can't dent this stuff. So you imagine driving a car that can't be dented. So this is one of the things I see the organization doing. Continuing the process of developing the sustainable economic theory and outreaching to people to come up with all the ins and outs of what this theory needs to be. This graph, this chart is from an effort last summer that I was a part of for 3 days, a couple hours a day, in a conference I went to where we were actually tasked with that sort of first cut. What would be the principles of a sustainable economic system? So we came up with these 5. Can everybody see them? Another thing we will do, we'll publish a book. You gotta have a book. And I love the fact that in 1951, this is even before the 55 partnership with Walt Disney, those rocket scientists knew they needed to promote what they knew how to do with a book. And they wrote The Conquest of Space, and since they didn't have Disney yet, they illustrated it with photorealistic paintings by a famous artist named Chesley Bonestell. And this book didn't just give the words of what they do, it gave pictures of what it would look like when we were doing it. And I have it over there if anyone wants to see it, because this is something that I've enjoyed having in the collection. We will prototype this transformational economic system through a socio-political online game simulation inspired by the World Game, which was originally developed by Buckminster Fuller in the 1960s. And this language comes from the Buckminster Fuller website, a little bit of the history. In the 1960s, Buckminster Fuller proposed a great logistics game and world peace game, later shortened to simply the World Game, that was intended to be a tool that would facilitate a comprehensive, anticipatory design science approach to the problems of the world. The entire world is now the relevant unit of analysis, not the city, state, or nation.